The rain hammered Manhattan's Upper West Side with the kind of fury that sent tourists scrambling for overpriced umbrellas and reminded locals why they paid $3,000 a month for studios the size of walk-in closets. Inside Le Bernardin, the city's most exclusive French restaurant, the storm became distant theater through floor-to-ceiling windows that cost more to insure than most people earned in a year. White tablecloths stretched across the dining room like fresh snow, each place setting a work of geometric precision that would make a surgeon weep. Claire Morgan sat alone at table 7, her fingers wrapped around the stem of a Chablis glass she'd barely touched. 30 years old and worth $500 million, CEO of Morgan Tech, the youngest woman to take an artificial intelligence company public in Silicon Valley history. Her blonde hair swept into a chignon that had required 45 minutes and a stylist who charged $200 an hour. The black dress whispered Valentina with every slight movement, and the diamonds at her throat caught the ambient light like captured stars. She checked her phone for the 4th time in 10 minutes, then forced herself to set it face down on the table. 8 years since her last first date. 8 years of building an empire from ashes and rage and grief so profound it had carved out her insides and left something hollow that no amount of success could fill. Her assistant Emma had created the profile against explicit instructions, downplaying the money and the magazine covers and the board meetings where grown men twice her age fell silent when she spoke. Just Sophie, who works in tech, looking for connection, tired of being alone. The messages had poured in by the hundreds. She'd deleted them all unread until one stopped her finger mid-swipe. Ryan Mitchell, widowed father, raising daughter alone. The words had been simple, almost austere in their honesty. I know what it's like to lose someone and keep going for the sake of a child. If you ever want to talk to someone who understands that particular kind of tired, I'm here. She'd agreed to one dinner, telling herself it meant nothing, that she was only pacifying Emma, who'd staged an intervention after finding her crying in the office at midnight on another Mother's Day spent alone. Now, watching rain streak the windows while couples murmured over Dover sole and lobster thermidor, her hands trembled with a possibility she hadn't felt in 8 years. The door opened. A mountain of a man stepped through, water streaming from shoulders that belonged on a statue commemorating war and sacrifice. 6'2" and somewhere north of 220 pounds. All of it earned through discipline that showed in the way he moved, careful and controlled, even while soaked to the bone. His suit pulled tight across his chest, department store rather than designer. The fabric carrying the slightly wrong sheen that marked it as polyester blend instead of wool. One large hand gripped the smaller hand of an 8-year-old girl whose hair caught the restaurant's ambient light and threw it back like spun platinum. The child stopped walking. Her eyes, blue as winter sky, locked onto Claire's with an intensity that it made the executive's breath catch in her chest. Tears spilled down the girl's cheeks, instantaneous and unstoppable, as if someone had opened a valve that had been sealed for years. The words came out in a rush, high and clear and certain. "Daddy, it's her, the lady from my dreams, the one who smells like rain and expensive flowers." Before the man could react, before Claire could process what was happening, the girl broke free and ran. Small hands grabbed Claire's, gripping with desperate certainty that transcended reason. "You're my real mom. I remember you." Claire's vision narrowed to a tunnel. The restaurant sounds faded beneath the sudden roar of blood in her ears. She stared at this child, this stranger with platinum hair and winter eyes, and felt the floor tilt beneath her chair. I've never met you before." The man reached them in 3 long strides, his face a mixture of mortification and concern. Up close, Claire could see the scars, a thin white line through his left eyebrow, another along his jawline that disappeared into the collar of his ill-fitting shirt. Military scars. She'd seen enough veterans at charity galas to recognize the particular geography of combat on human skin. "I'm so sorry." His voice carried gravel and exhaustion, the particular timbre of someone who'd spent years shouting orders over helicopter, rotors, and automatic weapons fire. "Ava, sweetheart, you can't just run up to people like that. I'm Ryan Mitchell. This is my daughter. She has a very active imagination." But Ava wasn't listening. She held Claire's hands and studied her face with the focused attention of an art historian examining a masterwork. "You used to sing to me, a sad song about sunshine and gray skies. You cried a lot. You smelled like this. She leaned closer, inhaling. Chanel and hospital smelled together. And you held me so tight like you were scared I'd disappear. The glass in Claire's hand hit the table too hard. Wine sloshed over the rim, spreading across white linen like blood on snow. How could this child know about the perfume? Claire's signature scent, the one luxury she'd maintained even during the Oakland studio days, bought one precious bottle at a time when she could afford nothing else. And the hospital, she'd given birth at San Francisco General, the public hospital that had accepted her Medicaid when her mother had cut off her insurance along with everything else. Ryan pulled Ava back gently but firmly. I really am sorry. She's been having these episodes. Very detailed stories about people she meets. Her therapist says it's normal for gifted kids. Just an overactive imagination working through attachment issues. Claire forced herself to breathe, to think through the shock in the way this child's face seemed to echo something she saw in the mirror every morning. How old is she? 8. Well, 8 and 2 months if you ask her. And where is her mother? Something broke across Ryan's face, a hairline fracture in his careful composure. Ava's adopted. My sister Sarah raised her from 2 months old. Sarah died 8 years ago in a car accident. She made me promise. His voice cracked. I'm all Ava has. We're all each other has. The waiter materialized with menus, bound in leather and embossed with gold, speaking rapid French that Claire understood, but Ryan clearly didn't. She ordered for them without thinking, her fluency automatic. Watching Ryan's face close off slightly as he registered yet another gulf between their worlds. When she selected a bottle of wine that cost more than his monthly car payment, he held up a hand. Just water for me. I'm driving. He helped Ava with her napkin, the movements practiced and tender, making sure the child was settled before he touched his own. Claire watched those hands, scarred, calloused, moving with military precision, tempered by infinite gentleness. This man had braided that platinum hair, had learned to navigate the complex social dynamics of elementary school, had become both mother and father to a child who wasn't even biologically his. I really don't normally act like this with strangers, Ryan said, pulling Ava close in a gesture that was protective and apologetic all at once. But Ava twisted away, fixing Claire with those uncanny eyes. I'm not a stranger, I know you. You sing a different song than other people. You make You Are My Sunshine sadder, and you smell like flowers that come in black boxes. And you have a tiny scar behind your left ear from when you fell off your pink bicycle when you were 7. The world stopped. Claire's hand moved automatically to her left ear, fingers finding the small ridge of scar tissue she'd carried since childhood. A bicycle accident in the driveway of the Pacific Heights mansion. Her father still alive then, catching her before Catherine could turn it into a lecture about grace and propriety. No one knew about that scar. Even her magazine profiles didn't mention it. She wore her hair to cover it, a vanity she'd never admitted to anyone. Ryan's face had gone pale. Ava, that's enough. We should go. But Claire couldn't move. Because this child knew things, impossible things, and because somewhere in the back of her mind, a door she'd welded shut 8 years ago had begun to crack open. Where did you say Ava was born? She wasn't born to us. Sarah adopted her, found her at, he hesitated, at the hospital where Sarah worked. Someone abandoned her in the pediatric emergency room with just a note that said, please love her. The words fell like stones into still water, ripples spreading outward. Which hospital? San Francisco General. The crack became a chasm. 8 years ago, Claire had given birth at San Francisco General, alone and terrified and bleeding out while doctors shouted code blue, and her mother stood in the corner with diamond-cold eyes. They'd told her the baby didn't survive. They'd told her it was better not to see the body. They'd told her lies, apparently, and she'd been too broken to question them. Claire made herself speak through the tightness in her throat. When did your sister find Ava? Ryan pulled out his phone, navigated to a photo album with the careful deliberation of someone still learning technology. Sarah sent me pictures from Afghanistan. The date stamp says March 4th, 2016. 2 in the morning, March 4th. 37 minutes after doctors told Claire her daughter had died. Ava chose that moment to push her platinum hair away from her face, revealing both ears. Behind the right one, just where Claire's scar sat on the left, was a birthmark, small, pale pink, shaped like a crescent moon. Exactly the birthmark that appeared in 5 generations of Morgan women, passed down through the maternal line like a genetic signature. Exactly the birthmark Claire carried. Exactly the birthmark the ultrasound technician had pointed out during her 20-week scan, before Catherine had forbidden her from returning for any further prenatal care. "That's hereditary," Claire whispered, her vision blurred with tears she hadn't given herself permission to shed in years. "Every Morgan woman has it. My mother, my grandmother, my great-grandmother, me. And my daughter would have had it too." The doctors confirmed it during the ultrasound. Ryan stared at the birthmark, then at Claire's ear, then back at his daughter. The color had drained from his face, leaving him gray beneath his tan. "This can't be." But Claire was already fumbling for her phone, hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped it twice. "I need your number. We need to talk. Really talk. Not here." Because the impossible was staring her in the face with winter blue eyes and a hereditary birthmark and knowledge that no 8-year-old should possess. Her daughter Stella, the baby they'd told her didn't survive, the child she'd mourned for 8 years, the ghost that haunted her penthouse and her boardrooms in every empty moment when the work finally stopped, might be sitting across from her in a pink dress and Target shoes, calling a stranger daddy and asking for answers Claire didn't know how to give. The restaurant had faded to irrelevance. Other diners glanced their way with the particular annoyance of the wealthy who'd paid for an exclusive experience that didn't include crying children and emotional scenes. Ryan seemed to shrink under their stares, his shoulders rounding inward as he registered every expensive watch and designer handbag, every reminder that he didn't belong in this world of $300 wine and prix-fixe menus that cost more than his weekly grocery budget. Claire barely tasted the food when it arrived. The Dover sole might have been cardboard for all she registered. Ava pushed pasta around her plate while pulling out a sketch pad from her backpack, flipping through pages with determined purpose. Each sheet showed the same woman's face from different angles, rendered in colored pencil with a skill that seemed impossible for someone so young. Always the same sad eyes, always the same reaching arms, always unmistakably the face looking back from Claire's mirror each morning. "I've been drawing you since I was 3, Ava explained, her child's voice matter-of-fact in the way only children could be when discussing the impossible. She showed Claire a sketch dated 4 years earlier, each page carefully marked with the day it was completed. "Daddy thought I made up an imaginary friend, but I knew you were real. I knew you'd find me, or I'd find you. I wasn't sure how it worked." The drawings made Claire's skin prickle with something between wonder and terror. One showed her in a Stanford sweatshirt she'd worn to tatters during her pregnancy, studying in the library because her studio apartment had no desk. Another depicted an office with a distinctive view, the Transamerica Pyramid in the exact angle visible only from Morgan Tech's executive floor. A third captured her in a hospital bed, face twisted in agony, arms reaching for something beyond the frame's edge. "This is impossible." But Claire's voice carried no conviction, because she was looking at herself pregnant, and no one had seen those photos. Catherine had made sure of that, confiscating Claire's phone for the duration of her pregnancy, cutting her off from everyone who might have documented her shame. Ryan leaned over, studying the drawings with the intensity of someone trying to solve a tactical problem under fire. "Sarah used to say Ava had special sensitivity to people's emotions, that she could read energy or something. I always thought it was just nurse mysticism, you know? But these," he touched the hospital sketch. "How could she know what you looked like pregnant if she's never seen photos?" The question hung between them like smoke. Claire pulled the sketch closer, her designer dress forgotten, the diamonds at her throat feeling suddenly heavy enough to choke her. "I don't know, but I need answers. Real answers. Not what they told me 8 years ago." Her phone was already out, fingers moving through contacts with the muscle memory of someone who'd built an empire on making impossible things happen through sheer force of will and unlimited resources. "I'm calling my legal team. I want every record from San Francisco General from March 3rd, 2016. Every signature, every form, every security camera feed. If someone sneezed in that hospital that night, I want to know about it." Ryan's hand closed over hers, stopping the call mid-dial. His palm was rough with calluses, warm and solid in a way that made her realize how cold her own hands had become. Claire, stop. Think about what you're doing. If we start pulling hospital records, asking questions, digging into adoption paperwork, Ava's life gets turned upside down. Everything she knows about who she is, where she came from. I spent 8 years thinking my daughter was dead. The words came out harder than she'd intended, edged with all the rage she'd buried beneath ambition and success in the carefully constructed armor of a woman who'd been told she wasn't allowed to grieve. 8 years, if there's even a chance, then we do this carefully. Ryan's voice carried the particular authority of someone accustomed to making life and death decisions under pressure. We get a DNA test first. Quiet, private, through a lab that doesn't ask questions. If it's not a match, we know this is just a strange coincidence. If it is, he swallowed hard. If it is, then we have proof before we start accusing hospitals of falsifying records. Claire wanted to argue, to unleash the full force of Morgan Tech's resources and her family's connections and 8 years of suppressed maternal fury. But something in Ryan's face stopped her. Fear, yes, the very real terror of a man who'd spent 8 years being the only parent Ava knew. Facing the possibility of losing her to biology and money and legal battles he couldn't hope to win, but also love, fierce and protective and completely selfless. The kind of love that put a child's well-being above everything else, even your own heart. Okay. She forced herself to breathe, to think like a CEO negotiating a merger instead of a mother who'd just found her ghost. DNA test first, but I'm paying for expedited processing. I can't wait weeks. I can't let you pay for everything. I'm not doing this for you. The words came out sharper than intended, and she saw him flinch. I'm sorry, I need to know. And if she's mine, if they lied to me, if someone took my daughter, her voice broke. I need to know. Ava had been quiet through this exchange, watching them both with those two old eyes. Now she reached across the table and took both their hands, linking them together. Her small fingers felt impossibly fragile, bird-bone delicate, but her grip was certain. I already know what the test will say. You're my mom, you sang to me. You loved me, and then something bad happened and you thought I was gone. But I wasn't. Aunt Sarah found me and kept me safe until you could find me again. That's what happened. I've always known. The certainty in her voice made Claire's chest ache. This child had spent 8 years dreaming about a mother she'd never met, creating an entire mythology around a woman who'd held her for maybe 30 seconds before the darkness came. And Claire had spent 8 years mourning a daughter she'd been told was ash in a ceramic urn, building an artificial intelligence empire on the foundation of her rage at a universe that had stolen the one thing she'd wanted more than anything. They left Le Bernardin in a strange procession, the CEO in her Valentino dress, and the personal trainer in his ill-fitting suit, and the 8-year-old girl who might be the bridge between them. The valet brought Claire's Tesla and Ryan's 12-year-old Camry with the same professional courtesy, though Claire caught the slight curl of his lip as he handed Ryan the keys to a car that probably needed new brake pads and definitely needed a paint job. I'll text you the lab information, Claire said, rain soaking through her dress in the 30 seconds it took to reach her car. Tomorrow morning, if you're available. The one I use is discreet. Ryan nodded, already soaked, looking like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Ava pressed her face against the Camry's window, palm flat against the glass, and mouthed two words that Claire lip-read more than heard. Love you. She drove home to her penthouse in Soma, the city lights blurring through rain and tears until she couldn't tell which was which. The apartment spread across the entire top floor of a building that had won architectural awards, floor-to-ceiling windows offering views from the Golden Gate Bridge to the Bay Bridge, every surface carefully curated by an interior designer who charged more per hour than most people made in a week. It was beautiful and empty and echoing, a monument to success that felt like a mausoleum. In her bedroom, she opened the drawer of her nightstand and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside, cushioned on black silk, lay a silver bracelet barely 2 inches across. Tiffany Sterling, engraved in script so fine it looked like whispered words. Stella. She'd bought it 6 months into her pregnancy, The one luxury she'd allowed herself when she was working 3 jobs and eating ramen for dinner and refusing her mother's increasingly threatening phone calls. She'd slipped it onto her daughter's wrist in those final moments before the darkness came, had whispered promises she'd meant to keep. They'd returned it to her in a plastic evidence bag 3 days later, when she'd finally been stable enough to leave the hospital, along with a death certificate and a small ceramic urn, allegedly containing ashes, and Catherine standing in the corner of her hospital room with the particular coldness that came from never having to touch anything messy or human or real. Claire hadn't opened the urn in 8 years. It sat on a shelf in her walk-in closet, hidden behind shoeboxes, a piece of her life she couldn't face and couldn't throw away. Now she wondered what was actually inside. If Catherine had managed to falsify death certificates and move babies between hospital departments, what else had she been willing to do to protect the Morgan family reputation? Her phone rang at 2 in the morning. Emma's name flashed on the screen, which meant there was a crisis at Morgan Tech that required immediate executive attention. Claire let it go to voicemail. For the first time in 8 years, the company could wait. Her daughter, possibly impossibly her daughter, was alive somewhere across the city, sleeping in a bedroom Claire had never seen, calling another man dad, and everything Claire had built suddenly felt like it mattered less than getting answers to questions she'd been too broken to ask. The DNA lab was in Palo Alto, tucked into a medical complex that served Silicon Valley's wealthy and paranoid. Claire had used it before when acquiring companies, verifying claims about founders' health that might impact valuations. They offered same-day results for clients willing to pay premium rates, and they didn't ask questions about why you needed genetic testing done with absolute discretion. Ryan and Ava arrived in the Camry looking exhausted. The girl had dressed carefully in what was probably her Sunday best, a dress that was slightly too small, shoes that had been polished but showed their age. Ryan wore jeans and a button-down that had been ironed with military precision, his hair still damp from a recent shower. They looked like what they were, working-class people trying to look presentable for something they knew was important but didn't fully understand. Claire had come straight from a board meeting, still in her power suit and heels, her armor firmly in place. The receptionist barely glanced up from her computer, already expecting them. Morgan Money bought a lot of things, including absolute discretion and zero waiting time. The technician, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and efficient hands, swabbed the inside of Ava's cheek with professional gentleness, then did the same to Claire. The whole process took less than 5 minutes. The waiting would take 8 hours, expedited processing with priority lab access, another bill that would make Ryan wince if he ever saw it. They sat in a coffee shop across the street because none of them could face going home to wait. Ava drew in her sketchbook while Ryan and Claire attempted conversation that kept circling back to the impossible situation they'd found themselves in. Sarah was a good person, Ryan said, stirring sugar into coffee that had long since gone cold. She wouldn't have participated in anything illegal. If Ava was really abandoned, if she really found her in the ER with just a note, then someone else put her there. Claire's voice was flat, stating facts the way she did in board meetings when the numbers didn't lie, no matter how much people wanted them to. Someone who had access to labor and delivery, who knew I'd just given birth, who could move a newborn from one department to another without raising questions. Your mother? The name hung between them like an accusation. Claire thought about Catherine Morgan, matriarch of Morgan Pharmaceuticals, a woman who'd built her life on controlling everything and everyone around her with ruthless efficiency. A woman who'd told her only daughter that a grandchild would be an embarrassing complication to the family reputation. A woman who'd arrived at San Francisco General 30 minutes after Claire gave birth, dressed in a fur coat and diamonds despite the March rain, looking at her hemorrhaging daughter with disappointment rather than concern. My mother would consider it problem-solving. The words tasted bitter. She told me the baby died. She arranged the cremation before I was conscious enough to object. She handed me an urn and told me to move on with my life, that I was young and would recover, that Stanford was still waiting if I wanted to come back, that she might consider restoring my inheritance if I proved I'd learned my lesson. Ryan's jaw tightened. And you believed her? I was 22, alone, and I'd just lost enough blood that they kept me in ICU for 3 days. Yes, I believed her. I didn't have the strength or the resources or the knowledge to question a death certificate signed by doctors. And, Claire's voice cracked, I didn't want to believe my mother would lie about something like that she'd let me think my daughter was dead if she wasn't. That's not problem solving. That's evil. Ava looked up from her drawing. Grandma Catherine isn't part of our life, is she? The question, delivered with childlike directness, cut through all the adult hedging and uncertainty. Claire met those winter blue eyes and felt something crystallize in her chest. Rage and love and protective fury all combining into something sharp enough to cut diamonds. No, sweetheart, she's not. The lab called at 4 in the afternoon. Claire answered on the first ring, putting it on speaker so they could all hear. Dr. Sarah Kim's voice was professionally neutral. The tone of someone who'd delivered life-changing news often enough to know that emotional distance was the only way to survive the job. Ms. Morgan, Mr. Reed, the results are conclusive. Ava Reed shares 99.9% genetic markers with Claire Morgan. She is without doubt your biological daughter. The coffee shop sounds faded. Somewhere a barista called out orders. Somewhere a customer complained about foam consistency. Somewhere the world kept spinning on its axis, indifferent to the fact that Claire's entire reality had just shattered and reformed into something new and terrifying and impossibly, wonderfully real. My baby. The words came out broken. My Stella, you've been alive all this time. Claire reached for Ava and found herself sobbing into platinum hair that smelled like drugstore shampoo and little girl sweat and everything she'd been missing for 8 years. The child wrapped small arms around her neck and held on with the certainty of someone who'd been waiting for this moment since she was old enough to know something was missing. I told you, Ava whispered. I told you I'd find you. Ryan sat very still, his scarred hands flat on the table, his face doing complicated things that Claire couldn't read through her tears. When she finally looked up, she saw fear there, raw and undisguised, the terror of a man who'd just heard that he might lose everything that mattered. But she also saw something else, relief maybe, or vindication. The proof that Ava's strange dreams and impossible knowledge weren't signs of trauma or mental illness, but memories of something real. So what do we do now? His voice was rough. Because legally I adopted Ava through Sarah's will. I've been her sole guardian for 8 years. And you? He gestured at Claire's suit, her watch, the Tesla visible through the window. You have resources I can't compete with. If you want to take her, I don't want to take her from you. Claire forced herself to let go of Ava, though every instinct screamed to hold tighter. You raised my daughter. You kept her safe when I couldn't. You taught her to read and tie her shoes, and whatever else fathers teach their daughters. I can't just erase that. I won't. But she's yours. Ryan's eyes were red-rimmed. Biologically, legally if you push it, if you get lawyers involved. Then we both get lawyers involved. Claire's CEO voice kicked in, the tone she used when negotiating billion-dollar contracts and hostile acquisitions. Joint custody, you're her father, I'm her mother. We figure out how to co-parent like adults. We put Ava first, and we find out who lied to me 8 years ago and why, because someone owes me answers. Dr. Kim's voice came through the speaker, carefully professional. I should mention that the genetic markers show something else. The crescent-shaped birthmark you both referenced. It's tied to a specific chromosomal marker that appears in only 0.001% of the population, passed exclusively through the maternal line. I've documented 5 generations of Morgan women carrying it. The probability that this is coincidence approaches 0. Claire thought about her mother, her grandmother, her great-grandmother, with their matching birthmarks and their matching coldness. Generations of Morgan women who'd been taught that family reputation mattered more than messy human emotion. Catherine would have known about the birthmark, would have seen it during the ultrasound if she'd bothered to attend any of Claire's prenatal appointments, would have known that any child of Claire's would carry the Morgan genetic signature like a brand, and she told Claire the baby was dead anyway. I need to see all the hospital records from that night, Claire said. Everything. Admissions, discharges, every patient who came through labor and delivery and pediatric emergency. Every staff member who was working, security footage if it still exists. My lawyers can get court orders. That'll take time, Ryan interrupted, and it'll alert whoever covered this up that you're looking. If your mother really did falsify records, she'll have lawyers too. Better to go in quiet first. See what we can find before anyone knows we're looking. He was right, which irritated Claire because she'd built her entire career on overwhelming problems with superior resources and refusing to accept limits. But this wasn't a corporate acquisition. This was her daughter's life, and someone had already demonstrated a willingness to lie and falsify documents and play God with an infant's existence. Going in loud might just give them time to destroy evidence or create new stories. Okay, we go quiet first, but I'm hiring a private investigator, someone who knows how to pull records without leaving footprints. And I want to talk to everyone who was working that night, nurses, doctors, janitors, anyone who might have seen something. Ava had been quiet through this discussion, alternating between drawing and watching them both with those two observant eyes. Now she pushed her sketch pad across the table. The current drawing showed three figures holding hands: a tall man with broad shoulders, a woman in business clothes, and a small girl with platinum hair connecting them. Above it, in careful block letters, "My family." I get both of you now, right? I don't have to choose? Claire looked at Ryan. He looked back. Between them sat 8 years of separate histories, different worlds. A daughter neither of them could imagine giving up. But also between them sat a child who'd spent her whole life feeling incomplete, dreaming about a mother she'd never met, trying to fill a space that had always been empty. You get both of us, Claire said. Always. We're figuring out the details, but that part isn't negotiable. You have a mom and a dad who both love you more than anything. Even if we barely know each other, Ryan added with a slight smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Even if we're from completely different worlds. Even if this is going to be complicated and messy and probably involve a lot of difficult conversations, you're stuck with both of us. Ava's face lit up with joy so pure it hurt to witness. Claire felt something crack in her chest, the armor she'd built around her heart developing hairline fractures that let in light and terror in equal measure. Because she had her daughter back, impossibly, miraculously back, but she'd also inherited a co-parent she didn't know, a shared custody arrangement that would require navigating two completely different lives, and the knowledge that someone she'd once trusted had stolen 8 years from both of them. They left the coffee shop as the sun began its descent toward the Pacific, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold that felt almost obscene in their beauty. Claire had a daughter. Ryan had proof that Ava's dreams weren't delusions. Ava had a mother, and somewhere in San Francisco, Catherine Morgan had no idea that the secret she'd buried 8 years ago had just clawed its way back to the surface and was coming for answers with the combined force of $500 million and a Navy SEAL's tactical precision. Claire drove back to Soma in silence, her hands steady on the wheel but her mind racing through implications and possibilities and the sheer impossible weight of what she'd learned. Her daughter was alive. Her daughter had been alive for 8 years, growing and learning and dreaming across the city while Claire built an empire on grief. Someone owed her those years, and she intended to collect with interest. Her phone lit up with notifications she'd been ignoring all day. Board meeting in an hour. Crisis with the latest algorithm deployment. 3 different vice presidents needing executive decisions. The carefully constructed machine of Morgan Tech requiring its CEO's attention to keep running. She looked at the messages and felt nothing but impatience for the time they'd steal from finding answers. 8 years ago, when they'd handed her that urn and told her to move on, she'd thrown herself into coding with manic intensity. 18-hour days building an algorithm that could detect infant health crises hours before traditional methods. Her rage had fueled innovation. Her grief had driven perfection. The startup had exploded when major hospitals recognized its life-saving potential, and Claire had taken it public at 28 because success felt like the only revenge available against a universe that had stolen her daughter. Now success felt hollow. The penthouse and the Tesla and the magazine covers meant nothing compared to 8 years of first words and first steps and bedtime stories she'd never read. Someone had stolen those moments, had looked at a newborn baby and Claire's hemorrhaging body, and decided that family reputation mattered more than either of their lives. She pulled into her building's garage and sat in the car, hands gripping the steering wheel, while security cameras recorded her breakdown with indifferent mechanical precision. The sobs came from somewhere deep, 8 years of suppressed grief finally finding voice. She'd been so strong. She'd survived Stanford and childbirth and disinheritance and loss that should have destroyed her. She'd built an empire and proved everyone wrong and showed her mother that she could thrive without the Morgan family money or blessing or conditional love. But she'd never stopped being the 22-year-old girl who'd held her daughter for 30 seconds before the world went dark. She'd never stopped being the mother who'd sung a lullaby she'd made up during labor, promising love and protection she'd failed to deliver. She'd never stopped grieving for the tiny weight in her arms and the possibility of who that child might have become. Now she had a chance to find out. Now she had a daughter who drew obsessively and tested in the gifted range and remembered things she shouldn't be able to remember. Now she had answers to find and justice to pursue, and a man named Ryan to navigate co-parenting with despite coming from completely different worlds. Her phone buzzed, text from a number she didn't recognize. Ryan's, she realized, the message brief and military direct. Got home safe. Ava's asking when she'll see you again. Tomorrow? Claire typed back with shaking fingers. Tomorrow. My place or yours? The response came immediately. Neutral ground, park. Ava likes Golden Gate, smart. Meeting at either of their homes would establish a power dynamic, make someone feel invaded or uncomfortable. A park was public, safe, neutral. Claire appreciated the tactical thinking, even as it reminded her that this man had spent years in active combat zones learning to assess threats and plan operations with precision. Golden Gate Park at 10, she sent back, near the playground. She made it upstairs to her penthouse before the next wave hit. 8 years of thinking her daughter was ash in an urn. 8 years of wondering what her child would have looked like, sounded like, grown into. 8 years of missing a ghost. And all that time, Stella had been alive across the city, dreaming about a mother with sad eyes who smelled like expensive flowers and sang songs about sunshine and gray skies. Claire pulled out her laptop and started making lists, the only way she knew to process emotion too big to feel all at once. Hospital records to subpoena, private investigators to hire, lawyers to brief, timeline to reconstruct. Because someone had made decisions that night. Decisions about Claire's body, her daughter's life, the truth they'd both been told. Someone had looked at a hemorrhaging mother and a newborn baby and seen a problem to be solved rather than human beings deserving of honesty and choice. She was going to find out who, and then she was going to make sure they understood exactly what they'd stolen and what it had cost. Not through scandal or public exposure that would hurt Ava, Ryan was right about that, but through private consequences delivered with the surgical precision of someone who'd built an empire from ashes and never forgotten how to turn rage into results. Her daughter was alive. Nothing else mattered except keeping her safe and finding the truth and learning how to be the mother Stella, Ava, deserved despite missing 8 years of practice. Claire pulled up photos from the coffee shop on her phone, studying her daughter's face with the intensity of someone memorizing scripture. Those eyes, that birthmark, that certainty that she'd known all along who her real mother was, even when everyone told her the dreams were just imagination. Tomorrow she'd see Ava again. Tomorrow they'd start figuring out what co-parenting looked like when one parent was worth $500 million and the other drove a 12-year-old Camry. Tomorrow they'd begin building something new from the wreckage of 8 years apart. But tonight, Claire let herself feel the full weight of what she'd lost and found. The grief and joy and rage all mixing together until she couldn't tell where one ended and another began. Her daughter was alive. The rest they'd figure out together. 3 days of digging through hospital records revealed nothing but bureaucratic walls and sympathetic administrators who couldn't release patient information without court orders that would take months to obtain. Claire sat in her office overlooking the bay, surrounded by lawyers who kept explaining privacy laws and HIPAA regulations and the impossibility of what she was asking them to do. She listened with half her attention while scrolling through background checks on every staff member who'd worked San Francisco General's maternity ward on March 3, 2016. Ryan called during her 4th consecutive meeting with legal counsel. His voice carried the flat exhaustion of someone who'd spent sleepless nights running tactical scenarios that all ended badly. I know someone, Jake Harrison. We served together in Afghanistan. He's a hospital administrator now, works at UCSF Medical Center. If anyone knows how to navigate hospital politics and find information that doesn't want to be found, it's Doc. Claire dismissed her lawyers with a wave and pulled up everything she could find on Jake Harrison in 30 seconds of concentrated searching. Former Navy combat medic, honorable discharge, currently Assistant Director of Patient Services at one of San Francisco's premier medical facilities. Clean record, stellar reputation, the kind of person who'd built a second career on the foundation of military discipline and genuine desire to help people. Can he be trusted? Ryan's laugh was bitter. I trusted him with my life in Kandahar, multiple times. If Doc says he'll help, he'll help. And if he can't help directly, he'll know who can. They met Jake at a bar in the Mission District, the kind of place that served craft beer to tech workers who wanted to feel connected to the neighborhood's working-class roots without actually experiencing any of the struggle. Jake turned out to be shorter than Ryan but broader, built like someone who'd spent years carrying wounded soldiers across hostile terrain. His handshake was firm, his eyes assessing Claire with the particular attention of someone who'd learned to evaluate threats and assets in seconds. So you're looking for information about a birth 8 years ago at SF General. Information that someone with significant resources doesn't want you to find. Jake took a long pull from his beer. That's not a small ask, brother. That's career-ending if it goes wrong. Claire leaned forward, every inch the CEO who'd built an empire on making impossible deals. Name your price, consulting fee, speaking engagement, research grant for whatever department you want. I can move money in ways that won't trace back to this conversation. Jake's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. Keep your money. Ryan saved my life in Helmand Province when I caught shrapnel from an IED. I've been waiting 8 years for a chance to return that favor. But I need to know what we're really looking for here, because if this is about covering up someone's mistake or settling a score, it's about finding out who told me my daughter was dead when she wasn't. Claire's voice came out harder than intended. Someone falsified a death certificate, moved a newborn from labor and delivery to pediatric emergency, and listed her as abandoned so my sister-in-law could adopt her. I want to know who gave those orders and why. Jake whistled low. That's not just medical malpractice. That's criminal conspiracy. And if it happened at a public hospital with a county oversight, there would be multiple people involved. Doctors, nurses, administrators, maybe even legal counsel. You don't disappear a baby without infrastructure. But his eyes had gone thoughtful, calculating probabilities and angles. There's someone you should talk to. Martha Chen, retired nurse who worked labor and delivery at SF General for 30 years. She left nursing about 3 years ago, lives in Daly City now. Word is she's been carrying guilt about something from her last years on the job. Drinking too much, not sleeping. The kind of weight that comes from knowing something you weren't supposed to see. Claire already had her phone out, pulling up property records and contact information with the efficiency of someone who'd built a career on finding leverage points and exploiting them. Martha Chen, 68 years old, owned a modest condo in Daly City's working-class neighborhood. Divorced, one adult son living in Seattle, pension from the county hospital system. They drove to Daly City in Ryan's Camry because Claire's Tesla would announce their arrival like a declaration of wealth in a neighborhood where most people were one paycheck from disaster. The building was aging but maintained, the kind of place where residents took pride in keeping their small corner of the world clean even when larger systems failed them. Martha's condo was on the 3rd floor, accessible by stairs that smelled like industrial cleaner and decades of other people's cooking. She answered on the 3rd knock, a small woman with gray hair and tired eyes, who looked at Ryan's military bearing and Claire's expensive coat with immediate suspicion. But when Claire mentioned March 3rd, 2016, something broke across Martha's face. Relief mixed with terror, the expression of someone who'd been waiting for this conversation and dreading it in equal measure. I've been wondering when someone would come asking. Martha's apartment was sparse, decorated with family photos that stopped around 3 years ago, as if she'd lost interest in documenting her life around the same time she'd left nursing. 8 years I've been waiting. 8 years living with what I saw. She made tea with shaking hands, the ritual giving her something to do while finding the courage to speak. Claire forced herself to wait, to let the silence stretch, even though every instinct screamed to demand immediate answers. Ryan sat perfectly still, using the particular patience of someone who'd spent hours on sniper duty waiting for the right moment to act. There was a young woman that night, early 20s, blonde, alone and terrified. She came in around 10 p.m., already in active labor and hemorrhaging badly. No family, no support, just her and the baby trying to survive. Martha's voice had gone distant, narrating events she'd clearly replayed thousands of times. She gave birth around 11:30. The baby wasn't breathing at first. Blue, not moving. We thought we'd lost her, but Dr. Morrison got her back, did everything right, and suddenly there was this perfect baby girl crying her lungs out. Claire's hands clenched around her teacup hard enough that she was mildly surprised the ceramic didn't crack. That was Stella, fighting for her first breaths while Claire hemorrhaged in the bed and doctors shouted about blood pressure dropping and possible hysterectomy. The mother was unconscious from blood loss, critical condition, maybe 50-50 odds. And then this woman arrived, expensive clothes, jewelry that cost more than I made in a year, carrying herself like she owned the hospital and everyone in it. She pulled Dr. Morrison aside and I heard them arguing. The apartment felt too warm suddenly, air thick with 8 years of suppressed truth finally finding voice. Martha's hands trembled as she set down her teacup with enough force to slosh liquid onto the coffee table. The woman said the situation was unacceptable, that her daughter's future couldn't include complications. She used that word specifically, complications, like the baby was a problem to be solved rather than a human being. Then she mentioned a number, 6 figures. Dr. Morrison hesitated, but she kept talking about careers and opportunities and making problems disappear quietly. Ryan's jaw had gone tight, the particular stillness that preceded violence or the superhuman effort to restrain it. Claire felt similar rage building in her chest, cold and precise and absolutely certain. Catherine, her own mother standing in a hospital room while her daughter nearly died, negotiating to make a grandchild vanish like a balance sheet error. What happened to the baby? Martha's eyes filled with tears. They told the mother the baby died. Dr. Morrison signed a death certificate that was complete fiction. I saw him do it, saw him backdate the time and mark cause of death as complications from premature birth when the baby was perfectly healthy. Then he had orderlies transfer the infant to pediatric emergency and list her as Jane Doe, abandoned outside the hospital entrance with a note saying, "Please love her." The room swam. Claire gripped the armrest of Martha's worn sofa and forced herself to breathe through the vertigo. They'd listed Stella as abandoned specifically so Sarah could adopt her through the system, could give her a legal identity that erased any connection to Claire Morgan and the scandal of Stanford dropout single motherhood. Why didn't you say something? Because I was terrified. Martha's voice broke. Dr. Morrison was chief of obstetrics. The woman, your mother, I'm guessing, had the kind of power that could destroy careers with a phone call. I was 6 years from retirement, raising my grandson because my son couldn't get his life together. And I needed that pension more than I needed to be right. So I kept my mouth shut and told myself the baby was going to a good home, that maybe it was better this way. She looked at Claire with red-rimmed eyes begging for absolution that Claire had no intention of giving. I'm sorry, I've been sorry for 8 years. But sorry doesn't give you back what was stolen. It just means I'm one more person who chose wrong when it mattered. They left with Martha's written statement, notarized that afternoon by an attorney who asked no questions when Claire transferred enough money into his retainer account to buy absolute discretion. The statement detailed everything: times, names, descriptions of Catherine's fur coat and diamond necklace, and the particular cruelty of a woman who could watch her daughter hemorrhage while negotiating her grandchild's disappearance. Back in the Camry, Ryan drove in silence while Claire stared at the bay waters and processed the confirmation of what she'd already known in her bones. Her mother had stolen Stella, had paid a doctor to falsify records and move her granddaughter like merchandise, and let Claire believe she'd failed as a mother before she'd even begun. We need more than one retired nurse's testimony. Ryan's tactical mind was working the problem, breaking it into components that could be addressed through planning and execution. We need documentation, hospital records showing the falsification, bank records proving the payment, security footage if it still exists. And we need Dr. Morrison on record admitting what he did. Claire was already on her phone, coordinating with lawyers who specialized in medical malpractice and criminal conspiracy. Getting court orders would take time, but she had leverage the courts didn't. Money and connections and the kind of focused rage that could move bureaucratic mountains when properly directed. By the time they reached her office, she had a team assembled that would have done credit to a military operation. 2 weeks of legal maneuvering produced a court order compelling San Francisco General to release all records from March 3rd and 4th, 2016. The hospital administrator who delivered them looked like he'd aged a decade overnight. The particular gray pallor of someone who just discovered his institution had been used for something criminal and now faced the consequences. The records told the story Martha had outlined with damning precision. Baby Morgan, born 11:32 p.m., death certificate filed at 11:47 p.m. with cause of death listed as complications from premature birth, despite APGAR scores indicating a healthy infant. But someone had made a mistake. The original time of death had been visible under black marker, showing 12:15 a.m. before being changed to make it seem like the baby had died during birth rather than after. And there, in the pediatric emergency admission log, baby Jane Doe, admitted 12:15 a.m., found outside hospital entrance, note attached reading, please love her. Same time, same hospital, same infant, moved between departments like paperwork rather than a human being, with a mother bleeding out 2 floors above. The bank records took longer, required federal subpoenas, and the kind of legal pressure only unlimited resources could bring to bear. But eventually they surfaced. Wire transfer from Catherine Morgan to Dr. Richard Morrison, $75,000, dated March 4th at 8 a.m., memo line reading consulting fee. Claire spread the documents across her desk and felt something settle into place. The cold certainty of someone who'd just been handed irrefutable proof and intended to use it with surgical precision. This wasn't a mistake or a miscommunication or even well-intentioned meddling. This was premeditated theft, planned and executed by people who'd valued reputation over human life. Dr. Morrison retired 5 years ago. The private investigator Claire had hired was efficient, inexpensive, and worth every dollar. Lives in Scottsdale, Arizona now. Golf community, nice house, comfortable pension. But he's had some financial troubles recently. Gambling debts, second mortgage on the house. The kind of pressure that makes people willing to talk if the price is right. They flew to Arizona on a private jet Claire chartered because commercial flights meant schedules and witnesses and the possibility of being recognized. Ryan looked uncomfortable in the leather seat, his body language screaming his awareness of the wealth disparity between them, but he'd agreed to come because Morrison would respond better to military authority than corporate power. Scottsdale in November was pleasant, dry heat and endless blue sky, and golf courses manicured to perfection, despite being built in a desert. Morrison's house was Spanish colonial with a 3-car garage, swimming pool, and mountain views that probably cost extra. They waited in the rental car until they saw him leave for his morning tea time, then intercepted him in the country club parking lot, where conversation would be private but observed enough that he'd feel safe. He recognized Claire immediately. Her face had been on enough magazine covers that even retired doctors in Arizona knew who'd revolutionized infant health monitoring. His own face went pale beneath his tan, the particular gray of someone confronting consequences they'd thought successfully buried. Ms. Morgan, I wondered if you'd eventually find me. Ryan stepped forward, using his size and military bearing to establish implicit threat without saying a word. We have bank records showing Catherine Morgan transferred $75,000 to you on March 4th, 2016. We have hospital records showing you signed a falsified death certificate. And we have testimony from a nurse who watched you move a healthy infant from labor and delivery to pediatric emergency and list her as abandoned. Morrison looked around the parking lot, calculating odds and options. Whatever you think you know, We don't think, we know. Claire's voice carried the absolute certainty of someone holding all the cards. You took money from my mother to declare my baby dead when she wasn't. You created false documentation. You participated in what amounts to kidnapping. The statute of limitations on fraud is 4 years in California, but conspiracy has no limit. Neither does the moral obligation to tell the truth when you've stolen 8 years from a mother and her child. She let that sink in, watched Morrison's face cycle through denial and anger, and finally resignation. You can cooperate, or we can go to the FBI and the state medical board and every news organization in California. Your choice. But understand that I have resources and motivation and absolutely nothing to lose at this point. You're going to tell me everything, or I'm going to make sure your comfortable retirement ends in criminal prosecution. Morrison's shoulders sagged. He looked old suddenly, the particular exhaustion of someone who'd made terrible choices and spent years trying to outrun the consequences. Catherine approached me 3 weeks before your due date. She already had your medical records. I don't know how she got them, but she had everything. Ultrasounds, blood work, projected delivery date. She offered me $50,000 to declare the baby stillborn, regardless of what actually happened during delivery. The parking lot was silent except for distant lawnmowers and someone practicing chip shots. Claire forced herself to breathe through the confirmation that this had been planned, that Catherine had decided weeks in advance to steal her grandchild rather than tolerate the scandal of illegitimate birth. When the baby was born healthy, I panicked. Catherine doubled the offer. She said she'd handle everything, move the baby to another department, create a new identity, make sure it got adopted through proper channels. I just had to sign the paperwork and keep my mouth shut. Ryan's hands had clenched into fists. You're a doctor. You took an oath to do no harm. That baby could have died in the transfer. The mother almost did die, and you let her believe her child was dead. How do you sleep at night? I don't. Morrison's voice was flat. I haven't slept well in 8 years. I told myself I was helping, that the baby would go to a stable home, that the mother was too young and unstable to raise a child properly, that Catherine was protecting her daughter from a mistake that would ruin her life. But I always knew it was wrong. He signed a notarized statement that afternoon, his lawyer present but silent, knowing there was no defense for what the old man had done. Claire recorded everything on her phone, creating redundant documentation that couldn't be destroyed or disputed. By the time they flew back to San Francisco, she had enough evidence to destroy Morrison's reputation and pursue criminal charges. But prosecution would mean publicity, would mean Ava's face in newspapers and her story dissected by strangers, and the Morgan family's scandal exposed for entertainment rather than justice. Claire thought about her daughter sketching in a classroom, making friends, building a life that was stable and normal despite the strangeness of her origins. Did she have the right to burn that down for revenge? The decision crystallized when Ava asked 2 days later, while they were having dinner at a Thai restaurant that Ryan swore had the best pad Thai in the city, "Are you going to put Grandma Catherine in jail?" Both adults froze. Claire had been carefully not mentioning Catherine around Ava, letting the child process having a mother, without adding the complication of why that mother had been absent. But Ava was gifted, perceptive, and had apparently been paying more attention to whispered conversations and legal documents left on coffee tables than anyone had realized. Would you want me to? Ava considered this with the seriousness of someone whose opinion had been asked and respected. I think I want her to admit she was wrong, that she hurt people, but putting her in jail won't give you back the 8 years. It'll just make me that girl, the one from the scandal. And I like being just Ava, who's good at math and draws pictures and has 2 parents now instead of 1. Ryan met Claire's eyes across the table. They'd been texting daily, coordinating schedules and sharing photos of Ava and slowly building the infrastructure of co-parenting. But this was different. This was making a decision together about justice and mercy and what their daughter needed more than revenge. Then we don't go public. Claire's voice was steady despite the rage still burning in her chest. But we don't let it go either. We confront Catherine privately. We make sure she knows we know. And we make sure there are consequences even if they're not criminal prosecution. She called her mother's office the next day and was unsurprised to be put through immediately. Catherine Morgan didn't avoid conflict. She managed it with ruthless efficiency, the same way she managed everything else in her perfectly controlled life. Claire, I assume you're calling about the regrettable situation with the adoption paperwork. My lawyers have reviewed the matter and determined that everything was handled legally at the time. If you're considering litigation, I'm not litigating. I'm informing you that I know what you did, that I have signed statements from Martha Chen and Dr. Morrison detailing exactly how you paid $75,000 to have my daughter declared dead and moved to another department so she could be adopted without my knowledge or consent, that I have bank records and hospital documentation and enough evidence to pursue criminal charges if I wanted to. Silence on the other end, the first time in Claire's memory that Catherine had been rendered speechless. When her mother finally spoke, her voice carried the particular coldness that came from 3 generations of Morgan women who'd been taught that emotion was weakness. I did what was necessary to protect you. You were 22, pregnant, alone, about to throw away Stanford and every advantage you'd been given for an illegitimate child. I gave you the opportunity to succeed without that burden. Look what you've accomplished. Morgan Tech, $500 million, youngest female CEO in Silicon Valley. Would you have done that with a baby on your hip? I would have been happy. The words came out with absolute certainty. I built Morgan Tech to fill the hole you created. I worked 18-hour days because going home to an empty apartment meant facing what you'd stolen. Every algorithm I developed, every life my company saved, it was all compensation for the one life you took from me. So no, I wouldn't have been a billionaire CEO. I would have been a mother, and that's what I wanted. Catherine's breathing was audible now, the slight hitch that meant she was accessing that she might actually face consequences for once in her carefully managed life. If you pursue this publicly, Ava becomes a spectacle, her entire life defined by scandal. Is that really what you want for her? What I want is for you to admit you were wrong, to acknowledge that you stole 8 years from your daughter and your granddaughter because you valued reputation more than human beings. And then I want you gone from our lives, permanently. She hung up before Catherine could respond, her hands shaking with adrenaline and the shocking realization that she'd just severed the last connection to her birth family. Whatever else Catherine had been, cold, controlling, occasionally cruel, she'd been Claire's mother. And now she was nothing, cast out of a life she'd tried to orchestrate like a balance sheet that refused to reconcile according to her specifications. Ryan found her an hour later sitting in her office, staring at the bay without seeing it. He'd brought coffee from the shop downstairs and sat beside her in silence until she was ready to talk. The comfort of his presence without demands or questions reminded her why Ava had bonded with him so completely. This man understood that sometimes strength meant bearing witness to someone else's pain rather than trying to fix it. I told Catherine she's not part of our lives anymore, that we have all the evidence we need, but we're not pursuing criminal charges because Ava doesn't need the publicity. And I hung up on her, which is probably the first time anyone has ever dared to do that to Catherine Morgan. Ryan's slight smile was the first crack in the tension. How did that feel? Terrifying, liberating, like I finally have control over my own life instead of living in reaction to her expectations. Claire sipped the coffee and let the bitter warmth ground her. But also sad because she'll never admit she was wrong. She'll rationalize this until her dying day as tough love that gave me opportunities I wouldn't have had otherwise. And maybe she'll be right. Maybe I needed to lose everything to find the drive to build Morgan Tech. But I'd trade every dollar and every achievement for 8 years with my daughter. They sat in silence while the sun tracked across the bay and the city moved through its daily rhythms below. Eventually Ryan spoke, his voice careful with the weight of a question he'd clearly been considering for some time. We need to figure out the custody arrangement, officially, with lawyers and paperwork and all the legal framework that protects Ava if something happens to either of us. Because right now, I'm her legal guardian through Sarah's will, but you're her biological mother with DNA evidence and resources I can't match. If you wanted to take her, I don't want to take her from you. Claire turned to face him fully. You raised my daughter. You kept her safe and loved and stable when I couldn't. You taught her to read and tie her shoes and whatever else fathers teach their children. I won't erase that or push you out because biology says she's mine. She's ours. Both of ours. and we need to figure out how to co-parent like adults who put her first. Relief broke across Ryan's face like dawn. Joint custody, 50-50. You're her mother, I'm her father. We work out schedules and schools and all the complicated logistics of two separate households. We probably drive each other crazy in the process, but we figure it out because Ava deserves both of us. Claire's lawyer drafted the paperwork that week, formal joint custody with equal decision-making authority, and a schedule that balanced Ava's needs against two very different lives. Claire bought a house in Redwood City, deliberately choosing modest instead of mansion. A four-bedroom craftsman within walking distance of Ava's school. Not the penthouse overlooking the bay, not the architectural showpiece that would announce her wealth like a declaration of war. Just a house where her daughter could have a bedroom and a yard, and neighbors who weren't separated by security systems and doormen. Ryan looked at the house and then at Claire with something complicated in his expression. Gratitude mixed with discomfort. The particular tension of someone accepting help while maintaining his dignity. I can't afford half of this. You're not paying half. I'm buying a house for our daughter that's close to her school and has space for both of us to be present in her life. There's a master suite on the main floor and another upstairs. We each get our own space, and before you argue about charity or handouts, consider that fighting over money wastes time we could spend actually parenting. They moved in during Thanksgiving week, Ryan packing his meager possessions from the apartment he'd shared with Ava for 8 years, while Claire hired movers to transport carefully curated furniture that wouldn't feel sterile or intimidating. Ava got to choose paint colors for her room and help would arrange books on shelves and declared the house perfect, with the certainty of someone who'd finally gotten everything she'd been dreaming about. That first night, the three of them sat in the kitchen, eating takeout pizza, because neither adult knew how to cook anything more complicated than boxed macaroni. Ava drew pictures of their new house while Ryan and Claire worked through the logistics of schedules and responsibilities with the awkward formality of business partners who hadn't quite figured out how to be family. I need to be transparent about something. Ryan's voice carried the weight of confession. I'm not comfortable with you paying for everything. My salary is $45,000 a year. I can cover groceries and utilities and my share of basic expenses, but I can't match you dollar for dollar on anything bigger. And I need to feel like I'm pulling my weight, not just, he gestured around the kitchen with its granite countertops and professional-grade appliances. Not just living off your money. Claire understood the pride beneath the words, the particular masculine dignity that came from being raised to be the provider, even when circumstances made that impossible. Then we split household expenses proportionally. You cover what you can reasonably afford, I cover the rest. No scorekeeping, no keeping track. We're not roommates splitting rent. We're parents making sure our daughter has stability and safety. Your contribution isn't just financial. It's everything you've taught her and the father you've been when I couldn't be there. Something eased in Ryan's shoulders. They worked out a system that night, Ryan handling daily household tasks and Ava's routine while Claire covered the mortgage and larger expenses. Imperfect but functional, the kind of compromise that let both of them maintain dignity while putting their daughter first. The weeks that followed were an education in how little Claire actually knew about being a mother. Ryan had 8 years of experience embedded in muscle memory. He knew Ava needed 3 stuffed animals arranged in specific order to sleep, that she hated having her hair brushed but would tolerate it during her favorite TV show, that her silence meant something was wrong while excessive chatter meant everything was fine. Claire fumbled through bedtime routines and school pickups and the complex social dynamics of elementary school with the humbling realization that no amount of business success prepared you for navigating the playground politics. Ryan taught her with patient precision, creating what he jokingly called parent boot camp, lists of Ava's preferences, charts of her schedule, explanations of the emotional cues that telegraphed her internal state. Claire studied like it was a hostile acquisition, taking notes and asking questions and slowly building competence through sheer determination. The breakthrough came 6 weeks after they'd moved in together. Ava woke at 2 a.m. from a nightmare, crying about losing her mother again. Ryan started toward her room from long habit, but Ava's voice stopped him in the hallway. I want Claire, I want my mom. Claire stumbled out of bed in panic mode, no idea what she was doing, but certain she couldn't fail at this. She found Ava curled under blankets, small bodies shaking with sobs that seemed too big for her frame. There was no script for this, no business strategy or tactical plan, just instinct and the muscle memory of having wanted this for 8 years. She climbed into Ava's bed and pulled her daughter close, letting the child burrow against her chest while the crying gradually subsided. And then, without thinking, she started humming, the lullaby she'd made up during labor, the one she'd sung for 30 seconds before the world went dark. Ava went still, then relaxed completely and whispered into the darkness, "I knew you'd come back. I always knew." They fell asleep like that, mother and daughter finally together, when Claire woke in the morning with a crick in her neck and Ava's hair in her face. Ryan was standing in the doorway with an expression she couldn't quite read. Something had shifted between them in that moment, from strangers co-parenting to something more fragile and real, built on shared love for the child sleeping between them. Living together revealed the vast distances between their worlds in ways the early co-parenting hadn't. Claire discovered that Ryan woke at 5:30 every morning for a run, military habit he couldn't break, and made coffee with enough noise to wake everyone in a 3-room radius. He discovered that she needed complete silence before 7 a.m. and worked until midnight most nights, the blue glow from her laptop leaking under her bedroom door like accusation. They circled each other in the kitchen with the wariness of strangers learning to share territory, each hyper-aware of taking up too much space or asking for too much accommodation. The real education came in watching Ryan parent. He had systems for everything, routines built from 8 years of trial and error that Claire disrupted with her presence. Morning battles over whether Ava needed a jacket, Ryan insisting because the weather forecast called for wind, Claire arguing that the child should learn to assess her own comfort level and accept natural consequences. School pickup logistics where Ryan knew every teacher and parent by name, while Claire kept mixing up which mother belonged to which classmate. Homework battles where Ryan had learned exactly when to push and when to let Ava struggle through frustration, while Claire wanted to solve everything immediately with adult intervention. "You're helicoptering." Ryan's voice was patient but firm after Claire had spent 20 minutes explaining a math problem Ava needed to figure out herself. "She's gifted, which means she needs to learn how to struggle with difficult concepts. If you solve everything for her, you're teaching her that she's not capable." Claire bit back a sharp response about how she'd built a $500 million company through solving problems efficiently, and maybe that skill set had value. But watching Ava's face, frustrated but determined, she recognized the fallacy. Her daughter didn't need a CEO. She needed a mother who could sit with discomfort and trust the child to find her own way through. How do you know when to help and when to back off? Ryan considered this with the seriousness of someone who'd asked himself the same question 1,000 times. I ask myself if intervening serves me or serves her. If I'm helping because watching her struggle makes me uncomfortable, that's about me. If I'm helping because she's genuinely stuck and needs a tool she doesn't have yet, that's about her. Most of the time, it's about me wanting to fix things instead of letting her learn to fix herself. The words lodged somewhere in Claire's chest, applicable to far more than homework. She'd spent 8 years fixing problems with money and strategy and overwhelming force, building an empire because she couldn't build the family she'd wanted. Now she had the family, messy and complicated and requiring skills she'd never developed, and all her usual tools felt inadequate. 3 months into their arrangement, Claire finally admitted defeat. "I don't know what I'm doing. I can manage a board meeting with hostile investors, but I can't figure out why Ava won't eat breakfast on Wednesdays or why she melts down over socks that feel wrong. You make it look easy, and I'm failing at the most basic parts of being her mother." They were sitting on the porch after Ava had gone to bed, the evening air carrying the smell of jasmine from the neighbor's yard and the distant sound of traffic on El Camino Real. Ryan leaned back in his chair and studied her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You know how many times I screwed up the first year? I once gave Ava formula that was too hot and panicked when she screamed. I forgot to change her diaper before putting her down for a nap, and she woke up with a rash. I called my SEAL buddies at 3 in the morning because I thought she'd stopped breathing. She was just sleeping deeply. Being a parent isn't about getting it right every time. It's about showing up even when you're terrified and loving them through the mistakes. Claire thought about her own mother, who'd never admitted uncertainty about anything, who'd governed their household with the same ruthless efficiency she brought to board meetings and charity galas. Catherine had raised a daughter, but never seemed to actually parent. There had been nannies for the messy parts and boarding schools for the inconvenient phases and trust funds instead of time. Claire had sworn she'd be different, but now she was discovering that good intentions without skills just meant making different mistakes. Teach me. The words came out smaller than intended. Show me what you've learned. I can replicate systems once I understand the logic. Ryan expanded on the parenting lessons he'd started, adding layers of subtlety Claire had missed. How to read Ava's silences. Thumb-sucking meant anxiety. Excessive drawing meant processing emotions. Quietness with eye contact meant something was bothering her, but she didn't have words yet. Which breakfast foods worked on which days based on mood and energy level. The precise arrangement of stuffed animals required for sleep. Mr. Buttons closest to her face. Princess whiskers at her feet. Peanut tucked under her arm, deviation meaning instant meltdown. Claire studied like it was an acquisition target, taking notes and asking clarifying questions and slowly building competence through sheer determination. She still fumbled, reading too fast during story time, forgetting the specific way Ava liked her sandwich cut, accidentally scheduling a dentist appointment on the one afternoon Ava had art class. But the failures became less frequent, the successes more natural, until one morning she managed the entire routine alone while Ryan was at the gym and felt something close to competence. The shift happened so gradually that Claire couldn't identify the exact moment when Ryan stopped being her co-parent and became something more complicated. Maybe it was watching him fix the garbage disposal with patient expertise while explaining the mechanics to Ava, turning a household repair into a physics lesson. Maybe it was the night he cooked dinner for all of them. Nothing fancy, just tacos assembled with care. And the casual domesticity felt more intimate than any expensive restaurant. Maybe it was simply proximity and shared purpose. Two people united by love for the same child slowly discovering they might also like each other. She caught herself noticing things she'd been too overwhelmed to register before. The way his hair curled slightly when it needed cutting. The scar through his eyebrow that gave him a perpetual look of skepticism. How his hands moved with precise economy. No wasted motion, the product of military training that had become unconscious habit. The rumble of his voice reading bedtime stories with different character voices that made Ava giggle. 4 months into their arrangement, Ryan made pad thai that was genuinely excellent. Not Silicon Valley fusion pretending to be authentic, but the real thing learned from a chef at the Thai restaurant where he'd worked briefly between military discharge and finding steady personal training work. They ate at the kitchen table with Ava chattering about a substitute teacher who'd let them have extra recess, and Claire felt something dangerous bloom in her chest. This was what she'd wanted 80 years ago. This exact configuration of family dinner and shared space and someone who knew how to make her daughter laugh. Where did you learn to cook like this? Ryan's smile was slightly embarrassed. YouTube, mostly, and trial and error. Ava was a picky eater when she was younger, so I had to get creative. Turns out, following recipes is basically like following tactical plans. Measure twice, execute once, adjust based on results. That night, after Ava was asleep, Claire poured 2 glasses of wine and found Ryan on the porch scrolling through tomorrow's client schedule on his phone. She handed him a glass and sat in the chair she'd started thinking of as hers, the one that faced the backyard where fireflies were just starting to emerge. Can I tell you something? Her wine-brave voice carried into the darkness. I think I'm falling for you, which is completely inappropriate and terrible timing and probably the worst idea I've had since dropping out of Stanford to have a baby. But it's true, and I'm tired of pretending it's not. Ryan went very still. The silence stretched long enough that Claire started mentally composing the speech about how they could absolutely ignore this and maintain professional co-parenting boundaries, and she'd never mention it again. Then he set down his wine glass with deliberate care and turned to face her fully. I know. I've known for weeks, maybe longer, and it terrifies me because we're finally stable and Ava's happy, and if we mess this up, his voice cracked slightly. If we try this and it doesn't work, she loses her family again. That's not a risk I'm willing to take lightly. But his eyes told a different story, and Claire had built a career on reading subtext and calculating risk. So we're careful. We don't tell Ava until we're sure. We date like adults who understand the stakes and refuse to let this destroy what we've built. And if it doesn't work, she forced herself to voice the possibility. If we try and realize we're better as co-parents than partners, we figure out how to step back without burning everything down. Ryan studied her with the particular attention of someone assessing tactical viability. Then he leaned forward, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, and kissed her with a gentleness that felt like permission and question all at once. She kissed back, tasting wine and possibility and the terrifying hope that maybe she could have both, the daughter she'd lost and a partner who understood what it meant to build family from wreckage. They kept it quiet for 2 weeks, stealing moments when Ava was at school or after she'd gone to bed. Quick kisses in the kitchen between preparing lunches, hands touching while watching television, whispered conversations on the porch about hopes and fears and whether they were making a catastrophic mistake. Claire felt 16 again, sneaking affection and testing boundaries. Except this time the stakes included her daughter's emotional stability and a co-parenting relationship that couldn't afford to implode. Ava noticed anyway, because of course she did. Gifted children missed nothing. "Are you and Ryan dating?" She asked it over breakfast with the casual directness of someone asking about the weather. Because Emma's mom says when adults smile at each other like you do, they are usually dating. Claire glanced at Ryan, who looked equally caught. They discussed this exact conversation in theory, but not prepared for it actually happening over Saturday morning pancakes. "Would that bother you?" Ryan's voice was carefully neutral. "If we were?" Ava considered this with judicial seriousness. "I guess it would be weird at first, but also kind of nice. Like, I'd know you were both staying, not just because of me, but because you want to be together. That feels more stable than adults pretending they're just roommates when everyone can tell they're not." The wisdom of 8-year-olds, delivered with perfect clarity. Claire felt something ease in her chest, permission granted from the person whose opinion mattered most. "Okay then. Yes, we're dating. We're being careful about it because you're our priority and we don't want to mess up the family we've built. But we like each other a lot. Is that okay with you?" Ava grinned with the particular triumph of someone who'd been waiting for adults to figure out something obvious. "Finally, Emma owes me $5. I told her you'd get together before Thanksgiving." The first real fight came 6 weeks later, triggered by Claire offering to buy Ava a new iPad for school. Ryan objected with unusual vehemence. The child didn't need $1,000 electronics. Half her classmates didn't have tablets. This was Claire trying to parent with money instead of actual presents. Claire countered that she could afford it easily and wanted Ava to have the same educational tools as her peers. Ryan shot back that throwing money at problems was Claire's solution for everything. From household repairs she could easily learn to do herself to avoiding the hard work of being present. The argument escalated faster than either of them intended, voices rising until they were both saying things designed to wound rather than resolve. Claire pointed out that Ryan's pride about money was getting in the way of giving Ava opportunities. Ryan responded that at least he'd actually raised their daughter instead of building a corporate empire as grief compensation. Claire went very still, and Ryan's face showed immediate regret, but the words couldn't be unsaid. She left, got in her Tesla and drove to the office and buried herself in work until 2 a.m. because that's what she'd always done when emotions got too big to process. When she finally came home, exhausted and wrung out, Ryan was waiting on the porch. "I'm sorry, that was unfair and cruel and not what I actually think. You didn't build Morgan Tech as compensation. You built it as survival. And now you're learning to be Ava's mother despite missing 8 years of practice, which takes more courage than anything I've done." Claire sank into her chair, too tired to maintain anger. "But you weren't entirely wrong. I do use money to solve problems because that's the tool I'm best with. And sometimes that makes me lazy about learning to fix things myself or sit with discomfort or be present when being present is hard." They sat in silence while the night insects sang and the neighbor's cat prowled through shadowy gardens. Eventually, Claire spoke into the darkness, voicing the fear she'd been carrying since the moment Ava had called her mom. "I'm terrified I'll never catch up. That I'll always be the parent who showed up late and doesn't know the invisible history you share with her. That she'll love you more because you were there when I couldn't be. And I'll spend the rest of my life being grateful for your generosity while resenting that you got the years I wanted. Ryan reached across the space between their chairs and took her hand. You want to know what keeps me up at night? That someday Ava will realize she has a mother who's brilliant and successful and can give her opportunities I never could. That she'll outgrow needing me because you can provide everything: college tuition, international travel, connections that open doors I don't even know exist. That biology and resources will eventually matter more than the years I spent learning to braid hair and navigate elementary school politics. The honesty cut through remaining tension like a blade through silk. They were both terrified of the same thing: being insufficient, being replaced, losing the child they'd each loved in different ways and different times. The recognition created space for something other than competition. So we agreed to be scared together. Claire's voice was steadier now. To be honest about the fears instead of letting them fester into resentment. And to keep putting Ava first even when that means compromising our egos or admitting we're wrong. Ryan pulled her into his arms, and she let herself sink into his solid warmth, feeling the particular safety of someone who shared her deepest terror and chose partnership over self-protection. This was different from the early kisses. This was the foundation they'd need if they were going to build something real instead of something that felt good until pressure tested its weak points. The breakthrough with Ava came 2 weeks after their fight, at 2 a.m. when nightmares pulled the child from sleep. Ryan started toward her room from habit, but Ava's voice stopped him. I want Claire. I want my mom. Claire stumbled from bed in panic mode, no script or strategy, just instinct and 8 years of wanting this exact moment. She found Ava curled under blankets, small body shaking with sobs that seemed too big for her frame. Without thinking, she climbed into bed and pulled her daughter close, and then she was humming, the lullaby she'd made up during labor, the one she'd sung for 30 seconds before the world went dark. Ava went still, then relaxed completely, whispering into the darkness, I knew you'd come back. I always knew. They fell asleep tangled together. When Claire woke with the Ava's hair in her face and a crick in her neck, Ryan was standing in the doorway with an expression she couldn't quite read. Something had shifted between them in that moment, from strangers navigating co-parenting to something more fragile and real, built on shared love for the child sleeping between them. The proposal came 4 months later, though Ava's relentless matchmaking had accelerated the timeline considerably. The child had orchestrated increasingly obvious scenarios, forgetting homework at Claire's office so both parents had to retrieve it together, claiming she needed both of them for parent-teacher conferences that could easily have been handled solo, drawing elaborate family portraits that featured Ryan and Claire holding hands while Ava beamed in the center. Ryan chose the park where Ava had learned to ride a bike, the patch of grass near the playground where they'd spent dozens of Saturday mornings. He went down on one knee while Ava pretended to play on the swings, but was obviously watching every moment with barely contained glee. I don't have much to offer. Can't buy you penthouses or private jets or the kind of luxury you could easily afford yourself. But I can promise to be the man who loves you on your worst days, who holds you through the grief of what was stolen, who teaches our daughter, that family isn't biology or money, it's the choice to show up for each other even when it's hard. The ring was simple silver with 3 small stones: sapphire, emerald, diamond. Ava's birthstone, his, hers, engraved inside in letters almost too small to read. Family by choice. It cost me $800. Took me 3 months to save. I know it's nothing compared to what you could buy yourself, but Claire cut him off with a kiss fierce enough to make Ava shriek with joy from the swings. When they broke apart, she was crying through her smile. It's perfect because it means us, because you saved for it, because it's not about carrots or status symbols. It's about 3 people who found each other despite every reason they shouldn't have. Ava sprinted over for a group hug that nearly knocked them all down, chattering about flower girl duties and whether she could pick her own dress, and does this mean she gets to call Ryan Dad officially instead of just in her head. They stood tangled together in the late afternoon sun while other park visitors smiled indulgently at the obvious proposal, and Claire felt a particular wonder of getting something she'd stopped believing she deserved. They married 8 months later in the backyard of their Redwood City house, 30 guests and string lights, and Ava serving as both flower girl and ring bearer with theatrical flair. Martha Chen attended, still carrying guilt, but granted this small redemption of witnessing the family she'd helped save. Ryan's Seal brothers showed up in force, gruff men going misty-eyed watching their brother marry the woman who'd given him back the joy they'd thought Afghanistan had killed. Claire's assistant, Emma, cried through the entire ceremony, vindicated in her 8-year campaign to get her boss to actually live instead of just work. The vows were simple. Ryan promised to make coffee quietly and teach her to cook more than takeout. Claire promised to stop trying to solve everything with money and learn to sit with discomfort. Both promised to put Ava first, always, even when that meant compromise and sacrifice and choosing family over ego. And Ava read a poem she'd written, something about families born from broken pieces finding ways to fit together, that left everyone reaching for tissues. The officiant pronounced them husband and wife. Ryan kissed Claire with the certainty of someone who'd earned this happiness through years of sacrifice and patience. Ava jumped between them for a group hug that became their first official family portrait, captured by Emma's camera and destined for the mantle. The reception spilled across the backyard as evening settled into night. Tank gave a toast about brotherhood extending beyond battlefields. Emma spoke about watching Claire build an empire to fill a void, then watching her learn that the real achievement was standing here in a modest house with a family built by choice. Ava surprised everyone with her own toast, thanking Aunt Sarah for keeping her safe and Daddy for never giving up, and Mommy for finding her way back. Claire danced with Ryan as fireflies emerged and neighbors' music drifted over fences, and she understood with perfect clarity that this was the life Catherine had tried to prevent. This exact moment, dancing in a backyard that wasn't impressive enough for magazine spreads, married to a man who drove a 12-year-old Camry, surrounded by people who valued love over reputation. Her mother had stolen 8 years thinking she was protecting the family name. Instead, she'd created this, a family that needed no protection because it was built on truth instead of appearances. 18 months later, Claire stood in what had been the guest room and was now a nursery painted soft gray with white clouds. Her hand rested on the swell of pregnancy that still felt miraculous after so much loss. Ava pressed her ear against Claire's stomach, talking to her baby brother about all the things they'd do together, all the ways she'd teach him to be brave and kind and never doubt he was wanted. His name is Silas, right? After Aunt Sarah? Ryan wrapped his arms around both of them from behind, and Claire felt the particular completion of having everything she'd once thought was ashes in an urn. Silas Reed Morgan, your brother. He'll never know anything except belonging. On the shelf above the changing table sat 3 photos in matching frames. Sarah holding newborn Ava with fierce protective love. Claire and Ryan's wedding day, hands clasped and promises made. And an ultrasound image of Silas, grainy but unmistakably human, proving that second chances sometimes came with interest. The silver bracelet that had started everything lived in a shadow box on the wall. The one Claire had slipped onto her daughter's wrist 30 seconds before the world went dark, engraved with Stella in script, beginning as whispered promises. Below it, words Claire had commissioned. Some circles, once broken, can be made whole again through faith and stubbornness and refusing to accept the lies we're told about what's possible. Ava would grow up knowing the truth about Catherine's theft and Sarah's love and Ryan's sacrifice in Claire's 8-year mourning. But she'd know it as history rather than wound, context for who they'd become rather than definition of who they were. And Silas would never question his place in a family that had fought so hard to exist. That evening, they ate dinner in the kitchen that had stopped being anyone's territory and become simply theirs. Ava told elaborate stories about playground politics that required extensive background on who was friends with whom this week versus last. Ryan added Parmesan to everyone's plates with the unconscious ease of someone who'd learned their preferences. Claire checked her phone once, saw 17 unread emails, and deliberately set it face down because Morgan Tech would survive without her for one meal. This was what she'd wanted 8 years ago when she'd held Stella for 30 seconds and promised to be a good mother. This exact thing, family dinner and shared laughter, and someone who knew how she liked her pizza. Catherine had stolen it thinking she was solving a problem. Instead, she created 8 years of suffering that ended here, in a kitchen in Redwood City, with a family she'd tried to erase, choosing each other every single day. Happy? Ryan's question was simple, but his eyes carried the weight of everything they'd survived to reach this moment. Claire thought about the penthouse she'd lived in during her CEO-only years, empty and echoing and perfect for magazine spreads, but terrible for living. Thought about board meetings and late-night coding sessions and the particular loneliness of success achieved alone. Thought about 8 years of believing her daughter was Ash, building an empire to fill a void money couldn't touch. More than I knew was possible. She meant it with every atom of her being, because her daughter was upstairs arranging stuffed animals for sleep in the precise order that made her feel safe. Her husband was loading the dishwasher with the patient thoroughness he brought to everything. Her son was swimming inside her, 4 months from joining them. And the family Catherine had tried to erase, the one she'd paid $75,000 to make disappear, was real and solid and choosing each other not because biology demanded it, but because love earned through suffering ran deeper than any genetic accident. The future stretched ahead uncertain. Parenting would present new challenges. The class differences that had caused their first real fight wouldn't disappear just because they'd said vows. Silas would bring sleepless nights and stress that would test them in ways they couldn't anticipate. But they'd face it together, this family forged through conscious choice, proving that sometimes the deepest bonds required no blood relation at all. Claire's hand found Ryan's across the counter, and he squeezed gently, promise and partnership, and everything they'd become condensed into one gesture. Upstairs, Ava called goodnight, her voice carrying the particular contentment of a child who knew she was exactly where she belonged. Catherine had tried to write a story about scandal erased and reputation protected. Instead, she'd written this one, about love that survived theft, truth that surfaced despite lies, and family that mended stronger than before the breaking. About a CEO who learned that empires couldn't substitute for human connection, a Navy SEAL who discovered that courage meant more than battlefield heroism, and a gifted child who'd always known her mother would find her if she waited long enough. They'd found each other. And now, finally, they could simply live.